Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm John Johnson, hosting your show, and I'm going to be talking about who you're with. Now, there's that magical thing called chemistry, and for all its things that it makes happen in the world, that chemistry, that thing that we just don't know how to describe sometimes, it just is. And we put that on top of who you're with. And that just sort of magically makes things happen, right? Well, I think we're going to kind of figure out something. What's behind the chemistry? Is it just magical things that are happening? Well, no. The reason you are with the particular individual that you are with it's very layered. Understand this. I talk a lot about when you are communicating with someone, there are ways that we can talk to them that get them to share a little bit more about themselves and that they may not have, say, maybe felt comfortable sharing. And talk about you taking the lead and sharing that back and forth. You can learn a lot about. So there are all kinds of techniques for learning about a person. But when we go beyond that sort of thing sort of presupposes the idea that we're in some sort of relationship with this individual, but does that explain why we are with them at this point in time? See, when you've gone through all of the work, and I call it work because you have to do a self-examination, you think about the person who's sitting across from you, who you're interested in, think about their background, their lifestyle, what they can bring to you, what you can bring to the table with them, all of those things. There's lots of stuff going on there. But when you finally settle on a person, I mean, think about this. You meet lots and lots of people on a daily basis. And who are you attracted to? Do you have in your mind a fixation on a certain type of, is it a hair color? Is it a height? What other traits that are on the external side are you attracted to? And have you found yourself drawn to someone that is totally opposite to who you said you'd be drawn to? Maybe you've written it down. Maybe you've been in conversations with people and talked about all these different characteristics. And when you think about it, sometimes in some people, they have a list that's so long. It says, well, there's nobody that would meet all of those. Maybe just a few. I mean, are you satisfied with a few of those characteristics? Or do they have to make the whole list and they have to fit that? Well, there's lots of things that go into who we are with, ultimately. I think a lot of it is trial and error. We learn things about ourselves when we're in combination with specific individuals that teach us about, wow, what's really compatible. And then we have in our minds sometimes this way of which relationships are supposed to operate. And there's lots of models out there that we use. It could be your parents. It could be a relative that seems to have fun with their significant other all the time. It could be someone else you grew up admiring, maybe the pastor in the church or maybe a group leader, someone who you thought really had a great relationship and you wanted to have that for yourself. And it could even be that the kind of person that they were with, maybe their physical features, you would be attracted to that just because you saw something working so well. But when you tried that out for yourself, maybe there were a few pieces that didn't work. Was it the individual? Was it the perception you had in your head? but ultimately you ended up with someone. And why are you with them? I think this is a question that we often find ourselves asking, but what's one of the times when this comes up? I think it happens when we're feeling really in love, deeply in love with this person. It could be a birthday. We want to celebrate their birthday. It could be Valentine's Day for a lot of people. And the other time when we wonder why we're with this person, it could be when you have a really big disagreement. And you're starting to wonder, why am I with this person? Having a disagreement doesn't mean that you want to break up. But I think you sometimes wonder about how did whatever perception they have regarding the disagreement, how did they come up with their way of thinking and it sort of skip past you and you not know? Because one of the things I think we pride ourselves is in knowing our significant other, kind of having an idea of what they think when they think. I mean, especially if we want to feel like we're really engaged in the relationship. And as it is, relationships being what they are, obviously it's give and take. You know, they have to invest in you, you invest in them. But that's something you take pride in. And when something comes out of the blue and it's like, wow, I didn't see that coming, how does that make you feel? Well, it might be a little unsettling, but thinking about who you're with, why you're attracted to this person, all of those things come back up to the surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explore some of those things. And aside from the fact that you have an attraction to the person, and even if it's the height, the eye color, the hair color, all of these other things that are more on the external side, who you're with oftentimes is a reflection of not only your needs, because we already know about the attraction, but not only your needs, but the other person also has some of the same traits as yourself meaning that they have their needs, they have their preferences in terms of attraction, and the fact that you two find each other and then strike an agreement to be in relationship, that's a magnificent thing. And I think you want to learn to celebrate that as much as we have holidays that remind us that we're in love, and to give gifts like, say, Christmas and Valentine's Day and birthdays, those kinds of, and Mother's Day and Father's Day, all of these days that get us to think about our significant other. But underneath all of that, there are reasons that sometimes they seem buried, but they are as much a part of our everyday existence as a day in the calendar. It's there. It exists. And being cognizant of that, I think, helps you not only reinforce the value in your relationship, but it also makes you seem more appreciative to your significant other. And you can speak to that in sharing that with them as to why they're important. You know, there are those of us who might be a little tongue-tied in sharing our feelings and our emotions. And guys get the rap of not being very emotional because they don't share their feelings. Because guys typically, and I say this in a general sense, it's not universal, but guys typically get the label of being very compartmental and not wanting to share their feelings because it's not a masculine thing to do. And I am very much of the school of treating people like they're individuals, because I think you can really find that a guy will share his feelings and his emotions, and which obviously is a very vulnerable thing. And we talk about guys not being vulnerable. Again, we can work around all of these things. I think the moments that happen when guys are really vulnerable like that, and it's not just when they have a need for sex. I know there's a lot that's put on that particular aspect of a relationship for guys. But I think the emotional part really has to do with their own investment in the fact that they love their partners, the fact that they want to be pleasing to their partners, the fact that they want to be respected. And they make a huge investment in and of themselves for this reason. And I'm saying that to the women who are listening, and I will speak to the guys about this very same topic when I come back from the break. Stay tuned.
The GSMC Sex Podcast is a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet. Download the GSMC Sex Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you can find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hello there, welcome back. Now, before the break, I was talking about how guys oftentimes get labeled for not having a lot of emotions or being very compartmentalized. And, you know, obviously those things exist, but sometimes it becomes such a blanket statement that we don't look beneath the surface to see what's operating there. And when it comes to the emotional thing, guys have a veneer. And it's put there because that is just a part of how we expect them to be. So what you see is you see people living into that expectation. But beneath that, and I'm saying right beneath that veneer, there's lots of emotion, there's lots of caring, and it just takes a little bit of work to find that. Now, some guys, it's a little easier to get beneath that veneer because they love showing it. And others, they just want to know that it's safe to actually share that emotion, because I don't know any guy that likes being ridiculed for having sensitivity, because there's a lot of comments from people who don't seem to do a very good job of displaying it, and it's if they make fun of the ones who can or who do. And until you're really strong in your own sense of self and masculinity, then these things don't show up. But what I'm here to say is that to the significant other, I think these things are very much a part of them and their day-to-day being in their relationship. And it just takes drawing people out. Now, I have found that is when a person feels most safe. When you're asking the questions, very specific, and you're having conversations and you're drawing them out. And there's a way in which you can do that, which really shows your sense of caring. And that's when it's most interesting. That's when you're really getting to learn something about who you're with. Because, see, this is not only a reflection of the person who's doing the sharing, but a reflection of the person who's doing the asking. And I know in the beginning of a relationship, I always give a huge emphasis on asking lots of questions, being in conversation. And the asking then means, okay, listen for the answer. Because in that part of the conversation, you learn a lot about where a person is, what their interests are, where the potential is for a relationship to go. And those are the things you want answers to. Not the answers that you can imagine in your head, but you want to hear the voice of the person who said them to you, so that you have a reference. And it really shows that you're connected. So as you can see, who you're with is a huge reflection of who you are. Meaning, when you've taken the time to invest and to find out about this person and then share on that level, or as I would say, when you're drawing a person out and they might be a little hesitant because it's a trust thing, that as you reveal more and more about who you are, then you can sort of lay the expectation out that they can share on the same level. And the reason we're doing this is because it's how you build trust with another person. See, if you expect a person to tell everything about themselves and you not share, then I think that's not the expectation to want to have to get authentic answers. Because what people will do is people can sense where you're going. People can sense what the right answer is, especially if you've lived long enough. Now, little kids, what we love about little kids is that they're unfiltered. But when you get older in life, because you've had your bumps and bruises, you learn what to say yes to and how to respond to things. That's part of your survival mechanism. And when it comes to the relationship thing, we all have a sense of we want to be on we want to look our best. So, yes, people tend to create answers, or sometimes they even create the illusion of who they are because of they want to be accepted. And this is huge, because what exists behind that desire to be accepted is the fear of rejection. So people create all kinds of illusions about who they are to the listener. But when given time to allow this person to speak and give authentic answers, and I say authentic because it has to do with really listening, not asking leading questions, because again, people can read you. And someone who has had their vulnerability betrayed, they learn how to keep things close to their chest. They don't want to share when they feel like what they say is going to be criticized, or to the extent that they might share something that's deeply personal that may have gotten them feeling like they're so vulnerable that they can't stay in that place. Now, there's another thing to be mindful of when people are sharing. Some people become afraid that after they've shared something, then they've overexposed themselves. So how do you navigate something like that? It really has to do with how you set this up. That the sharing and the vulnerability is okay. It's about creating that safe space. And I think when you reciprocate, then you create that safe space. You create a pact with that individual. I think you should speak to that specifically about the vulnerability that you're sharing. That, wow, I've not had the ability to do this with a lot of people, and I'm glad that I have the opportunity to do this with you. It feels great. I feel closer to you. These are the kind of things that help people open up. And remember, it's bilateral, meaning they do it, you do it. And when you've done that for a while, then, you start creating a new normal, and you create your closeness. So you're developing intimacy. You are displaying who you are, and who you're with is mirroring back the same thing. And this is how you keep it in the same place so that it doesn't get stilted. See, when a relationship gets stilted, when it gets out of balance, the fear that comes in, at least from the person who is, and I'm going to say it this way, who's overshared, is that they feel overexposed. And most of us have had that vulnerability taken advantage of by someone. And this is why there's fear. Again, when I mentioned about little kids being unfiltered, sometimes we as adults become unfiltered, but it's for different reasons. We may have consumed alcohol, may have taken some drugs, something that really lowers our inhibitions. Or it could just be an adrenaline high and we're just a motor mouth. That happens too. You've done something really exhilarating, but that's sort of a different way. You're just happy. You're just blah, 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 blah. That goes that direction. But people who are unaware of their sharing those moments, and that's when I've seen it go terribly wrong for them, because they may do something that's inappropriate or feel humiliated about and not want to share again. Now, these are learning experiences, I must say. And we all have an opportunity to learn from our past mistakes. That's what it is. It's a learning opportunity. Look, I'm going to take another break, and I'll be right back after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hi there, welcome back. I am John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, and I'm talking about who you're with. So, oftentimes we think who we are with is totally a function of who we're attracted to because of their looks, their height, their weight, that sort of thing. And as you can see, when you take time to talk to someone and get more in-depth information about them, let's say, get someone to be vulnerable to you, that's a lot more attractive. Now, sometimes that's scary because when we find out how powerful something like that is, sometimes it can scare us because we learn that to mirror something like that means that, wow, we have to be vulnerable as well. But you can see how much of a bond you can create with someone when we discuss things that make us vulnerable. We have to create a safe space. There is some trust that's involved, and we have to talk about those kinds of things. And that's where the depth of a relationship is. That's more of a function of who you're with than a lot of the external things. Now, those are obviously triggers. Now, remember in the very beginning I talked about chemistry. And for a lot of people, what chemistry means is sexual attraction. There is that. But when you've gone the direction of creating a relationship, some depth, being vulnerable, you can create some chemistry in that situation. And it has the potential to be much deeper, and it has more in it that carries with you all the time. You see, one of the things that we hear, and I'm discussing it from this position, that we hear, and women talk about the idea that, well, you know, he doesn't think about me when I'm not here. Because if men thought more about who they are with rather than who they're fantasizing about, they say men would be less inclined to cheat. That's the conversation. Well, I understand that thought process. Not just because I'm a guy, but I understand how, you know, we're talking about attention span and what we're attracted to and the like. But the idea here is when you create a relationship where we've had the deep conversations, we've had the thoughts that I know what you think, you know what I think, and it becomes a part of your being. When one talks about what we say, cheat-proofing your relationship, these are the ways in which you do that. Now, it's all about vulnerability. Because one thing that I can tell you about affairs, and this might not be new to a lot of people, but it's really about the voids that are being filled. That is why someone else could possibly come into a situation, is when there's a void to be filled, that vulnerability that's not being addressed. Now, sometimes you don't know, but when you're in communication with your partner, then you can learn that kind of information about them. That's why learning to talk and learning to listen. So communication is a word, but there are definitely parts about it that we have to learn to want to be engaged with our partner. And when I talk about answering questions, I'm talking about being authentic, learning that being vulnerable is a good thing, and that when you don't have vulnerability, you don't really have a relationship that's very deep. In fact, I would use the word shallow, because we can make up a lot of things that sound good to people. And remember earlier I was talking about how people read you and they learn how to give an answer based on where they think the situation, where the conversation is going, and what they think you want to hear, basically. And that can be very, very seductive to the listener, because you may think that you have something deeper than what really exists. But if you play this out over a little bit of time, you can learn to read a person, and if they're just feeding you answers that sound attractive, because this is about eye contact. This is about reading body language. See, this is the whole picture. And this is why when you're having a conversation with someone, this stuff works when you're face to face. Now, there's a lot that can be said on the telephone. I believe you can have lots of conversations with people and stay connected. I think that's great. But I love the one-on-one conversations when I have them in my presence, because this is where you kind of create the bones of a relationship, the skeleton, as it were. And then whatever comes out on top of that is what comes out on top. I mean, that's a metaphor, but it really goes the distance of learning about the person that you're with, who you're with. It's a reflection of you. Have you ever wondered when you look at a couple? Sometimes we're being hypercritical, but we're looking at those two people and they say, wow, what is it that she sees in him or he sees in her? I mean, we might look at them on the outside and say, wow, there's a mismatch. Maybe one of the individuals is really attractive and the other person isn't. And that's usually the observation that people on the outside make. They look at two people that are together, and when they seem really dissimilar, then we wonder, what's that relationship like for them? Well, there's a lot of variables involved in something like this. But when you go back to the things that I've talked about and how valuable conversation is, how valuable it is to be a good listener, how valuable it is to be able to be authentic, and the vulnerability, all of those pieces come together, and that helps to define not only who you're with, but it helps to define you. And this is how you can help bulletproof your relationship. These are the kind of things that give it longevity. Quite often, people think it's sex is what holds a relationship together. And that's a very important component. The physicality, the physicalness of a relationship is very important to a lot of people. But there will be times in life when that is not necessarily available to you. And what do? You could still learn to love your partner in all of these other ways. And even if it comes down to, say, maybe reminiscing about how you two got together and some of the conversations you've had, that could be a real romantic moment. So then when you give the candy or the flowers or the card, and I mean both ways. Guys can give their candy, card, and flowers to their girlfriends just as much as women can do that for their boyfriends. Guys do appreciate being acknowledged for the contribution they make in the relationship, and I mean in a real significant, meaningful way. Because we do take pride in who we're with. We take pride in you. We love you, and we want you to know it. Sometimes we're not great at it, but we're definitely making an effort. And I think if, as a woman, if you're listening to your guy and you let him talk, he can give you a very authentic answer. It may not be very, let's say, very flowery, but he will speak from his heart. Who you're with. I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.